This is Esther Lin for MMAfighting.com. Here are some of my favorite images from 2013. Fight weeks usually begin with an open workout, sometimes public like in the atrium of this Winnipeg shopping mall. Sometimes Johnny Hendricks entertains hundreds of fans at the Complexe des Jardins, giving a good stare down before returning to his light workout. And sometimes we're in a small gym where I've hidden my flash for little touches of extra light, and I'm doing my best to grab a shot of Clay Guida where his hair isn't flying into his face. If I'm patient, I catch an instant between action. Here, Chael Sonnen lost in thought for a brief moment during the open workouts for the UFC on FS1 debut. Months later, I still love the mesmerizing honeycomb pattern of the black and goldenrod yellow seats of the Boston Garden. When the workouts are public, we'll sometimes get wonderfully warm moments like this, where Anderson Silva brings up a kid from the audience to face off with him, having a bit of fun in the middle of all this fanfare and press attention. Seeing Ronda Rousey interact with fans at her first open workout for the UFC was fantastically frenzied. I'd never seen that kind of mania for any MMA fighter stateside before their debut, save Brock Lesnar. The UFC gym in Torrance was packed to the gills with happy fans that radiated an infectious glee. During the madness of fight week, fighters are able to find moments of respite. Here, Tom Watson spends the afternoon at a park in Rio de Janeiro to watch some skateboarding, just passing the time and keeping his mind off cutting weight with a lovely seaside sunset. This year, I continue to try my best to grab fighters between media day interviews for portraits, and here are some of my favorites. Chiesa and Kennedy with warm smiles, Swanson with intimidating seriousness, and the always playful Masvidal. In San Jose, I catch a rare smile from Nathan Diaz. This came after two very stern-faced photos. Here's a little sass from the light heavyweight champ in the lobby of Madison Square Garden. Former Bellator lightweight champion Michael Chandler posing for one of my favorite shots this past year. The giant windows of the Long Beach Arena giving me soft, gorgeous light that I dream about. 2 years in a row, CM Punk has granted Ariel Helwani an interview when we are in Chicago for UFC on Fox. This time, I made sure to grab a photo of the wrestler in front of his movie monster portraits. And the former middleweight champion, still strange to say that, Anderson Silva, is never serious, posing for a silly shot between pre-fight interviews at UFC 162. I always appreciate the fighters that like to have fun on the scale. Here's Julie Kedzie giving a nod to enter the dojo. Weigh-ins are a good opportunity for fighters to show off a bit of personality outside their interviews to a live audience. And here, Iliar dos Santos compliments Ian McCall's mustache with one of his own here in Rio. Even in the rematch, Anderson Silva remained jovial, striking a pose on the weigh-in stage in front of the huge crowd at the MGM Grand Garden Arena. Sometimes fighters need to disrobe entirely to make the weight. Usually they put their pants back on before posing, but Nathan Diaz flexes for the San Jose fans just the same. The tension in the first face-off between Silva and Weidman somehow manifested in this kiss of sorts. I find it interesting that Anderson Silva still maintains not looking directly in Weidman's eyes here at their July meeting, while Weidman seems to be looking through Silva's skull, daring the Brazilian to make eye contact. Occasionally, that tension and dehydration results in a little pushing and shoving, and ends in a flex-off, the likes of which I haven't seen since Gilbert Melendez and Josh Thompson had a pose-off at Strikeforce a few years back. I always get nervous and excited when fight night comes. This was such an electrifying moment for me. I've been working around women's MMA for a bit between Elite XC, Strikeforce, and Invicta, and shooting those Fatal Femmes cards. And while shooting Gina and Cyborg fight on Showtime was a giant deal to me, I had an entirely different kind of chill. Excitement when I heard Bad Reputation blaring over the speakers at the Honda Center and Ronda Rousey walked out of the tunnel into the sold-out, wildly loud arena. This is Michael Chandler walking out to defend his lightweight title against Rick Hahn. I relish the chance to photograph and shoot other organizations because it's an opportunity to work in a different setup and environment. Every promotion has their own rules, their own arena layout, so there are different images for capture. The depth of the hands reaching out make this one of my favorite walkout images. Again, I love fighters that don't take themselves too seriously, but I also love dogs. And I love that Julie Kedzie loves her dog Bailey enough to put Bailey right there on her sponsor banner. I wonder if Bailey had to pay the sponsor tax. That would be rough. One of my favorite moments this year was this second where Carlos Condit does a circle around the cage, and when he enters, running by Martin Kampmann waiting in his corner. And as Condit passes, he and Kampmann lock eyes. Condit narrows his stare, Kampmann snarls. I knew this fight would be violent. Fight for the Troops at Fort Campbell was one of the most interesting and rewarding events that I photographed, not to mention visually striking. Here's Octagon girl Chrissy Blair signifying the start of the first round. Let's get to some action shots. There was a lot of great action in front of my lenses this year, and far too many squished punch faces to include, but here's a bunch that were memorable for me. So much stunning, elegant hostility. I remember seeing Demetrius Johnson perched on John Dodson thinking, I can only imagine such a thing happening in a flyweight bout. This year, I shot 2 Michael Chandler fights, one that ended in a second round submission over Rick Hahn, and the other, a 5-round split decision barn burner with Eddie Alvarez, who I've never seen in a boring fight. Both fights gave me very lovely, savage images. Some fights, I ended up with piles of brutal portrayals, and in this case of Swanson versus Seaver, it was quite difficult to choose just one memorable image. Yet, many of the indelible images during fights were not of strikes or submissions, but of heated emotions, inciting your opponent, or galvanizing the crowd into a roar. In every fight with Nick Diaz, it is a goal of mine to capture Diaz taunting. Here, he is talking to St. Pierre, who seem more resolute, focused on the task of winning the fight, and less concerned with Diaz's mental tactics. The expression a fighter wears after suffering a knockdown, if they are alert, is generally one of fear. Here, Cheick Kongo appears panicked as Roy Nelson walks in for the kill. And this bout. Wild, glorious, insane. That third round was thrilling. I remember feeling deafened at the Toyota Center, even with my earplugs firmly in place. There were instances that were so full of effort and ferocity, where so much sweat and blood mixed that you could see it spraying in multiple directions, raining on the photographers, leaving a glistening sheen of combat on the apron and a pungent bouquet of brutality. Wild techniques continued to surface, wowing us throughout the year. And the heretofore invincible fell twice, 3 if you count St. Pierre. I remember seeing Silva falling, head crashing to the canvas, and for an instant, I considered that Silva might still be playing a game. That short disbelief, like someone had stolen all the air from the arena for a second and then replaced it with the delirious sound of shock. In the second meeting between Silva and Weidman, we were given one of the most real, grotesque images of 2013. One that reminded us of our fragility as humans, that even our most dynamic warriors can very literally be broken. And that realization gave way to the very sobering sound of Anderson Silva screaming in agony. The faces of those around the cage had mouths agape, hands in the air, waving madly. In that moment when a fight ends, I am always watching both the victorious and the defeated. The heartbreak is more often quiet. Fights end in both suffering and sweet relief, that stark contrast of pain and joy. Gonzaga smiled, revealing the teeth printed onto his mouthguard that lent him a toothy, giddy grin. For these fighters, pride, joy, toiling for months to succeed in this resolute manner. For some, happiness that they now had reached the next ledge on their climb to the top. Moments when a fighter blissfully forgets he's celebrating while he's still attached to his submitted opponent. In a defiant success, Nate Diaz's arms flexed in triumph, an expected reaction to winning over Gray Maynard. And perhaps too many times this year, tenuous endings where there was no clear champion. Here, there are no photos of a nose crossing the finish line in prize fighting. Sometimes, there are only two who battled, both sure of their victory. Other times, we know in our brave hearts too that we've won, even if that rapture is crushed in a judge's decision. Johnny Hendricks had no doubt he triumphed. Here, Anthony Pettis seized the lightweight title swiftly before the pain of his knee would have a chance to bother him. The overthrown Henderson looking on at the new champion, being celebrated in his hometown. Even in her painful loss, Miesha Tate argued Kim Winslow's stop of the fight against Kat Zingano. Tate is a resilient fighter with nerves of steel who wanted to be given the chance to fight to her own end. She knew the blood was superficial and that her heart was still ready to throw. Tate possesses a sterling sturdiness. The heat of the battle often melts animosity. It is difficult not to respect that person across the canvas from you. Hard not to admire the sweat and blood they too have shed to make the bout remarkable. Eddie Alvarez and Michael Chandler put in a Fight of the Year candidate and are deservedly proud. Yet, there are trespasses that even a vividly impressive duel cannot dissolve. Pre-fight insults and maligning fester and explode. Antonio Silva could not resist reminding Alistair Overeem that the Dutch fighter had received just comeuppance. When that last horn sounds, so much exhaustion sets in, especially when a fighter has been fueled by his unwavering heart for 5 rounds. We regress when we are tired. We need our support systems, the pillars of our physical lives. In the post-fight press conference for UFC 166, Cain Velasquez sat with his training partner and friend Daniel Cormier, who listens to Velasquez answer questions with the rapt attention of a younger brother, smiling with pride and love. How wonderful to succeed in unison. In the hour after a loss, sitting on the dais and answering sparse questions about why, Chael Sonnen, why were you vanquished? and then not being asked any more questions. He gets a few minutes of solitude in a crowded room, isolated in his thoughts. There is, too, the rare instance of delight after defeat. This is a camera phone photo taken at UFC 166. Sarah Kaufman likes fighting. She enjoys a hearty brawl and even getting punched. I think we love fighting for the stories. And for me, one of the warmest moments of 2013 was Liz Carmouche cheerfully showing Rousey the bite marks on her arm from Carmouche's arm being lodged in Rousey's mouth during a choke attempt. There's genuine amazement and a lovely shared chapter between two kindred spirits. 2013 also brought us much unseating of the established champions, crowns usurped, and thrones abdicated. St. Pierre left his fight with Johnny Hendricks in a daze, and that fog ultimately cleared a path to his relinquishing the UFC welterweight title. For a second year in a row, here I am, staring right into his eyes, finding a certain clarity in them that was absent from his hazy ramblings. An enduring image in my mind, as it was very much one of the last things I saw in 2013. A harrowing picture that fills me with melancholy because this man on this stretcher was the UFC middleweight champ when I began my career as a photographer. And his injury jars me awake. We are vulnerable, soft creatures who have trained, hardened ourselves, but there are things we do not anticipate that can disarm us. Silva is wheeled out of the arena, and now we are speeding along into the new year, into what seems like a very different landscape, exhilarating and terrifyingly unfamiliar from the year that we have just lived through. This is Esther Lin. Thanks for watching my favorite photos from 2013 for MMAfighting.com.